from someone. Okay, I think we're live. Welcome everyone to another edition of the Perception Action Journal Club. This purpose of this one is to kind of be a companion to the now infamous Journal Club number 25. I think we're almost all back. In that episode, we went on and we were talking about a couple of things. One, mostly applying theory to coaching, and kind of stemming from that, the kind of contention it's raised. A lot of argument online and unsettledness it's happened. So we kind of talked through that for a lot. I think we went over 2 hours last time, and I think we aired some of our frustrations we were having with some of it. And so what I wanted to do with this one is kind of have, reflect a little bit on that, and then what can we do moving forward, right? Because I think a general consensus, I'll talk a little bit about the feedback I got from that. A general consensus is no one really likes all this arguing and bickering and things, no matter what side of the fence you're on. And a lot of people think it's not very productive. So the goal here is how can we move forward positively? So the first thing I thought I would ask with people is if you've had any kind of reflections about what we talked about last time. Have you thought about, have you had any interactions? Have you thought about what you said, what we discussed? Or are there any points that you wanted to kind of reflect on? And maybe I'll start with Marianne. I'll put you on the. Is there any kind of what were your thoughts after that and kind of since?
Hi.
Hi. I didn't do introductions. You guys are all regular.
I'm assuming people have probably watched the first bit of Mothers. Actually, I've had a few reflective discussions with some people who've listened to it as well. And initially, what was interesting about those, so they were people from the adventure sports primarily, who people. I guess really that you can't use just an ecological approach in adventure sports, because sometimes you have to make sure people are safe. And it just made me realize that actually there's still quite a lot of confusion, and the confusion was as if it were different ways of coaching rather than different ways perhaps of seeing the world, the different ways of skill acquisition. And so I think there's a bit of confusion there in that a lot of the coaches I'm speaking to are saying, well, I'm going to use both coaching methodologies, without maybe thinking that they have to pick between one or another, because sometimes we need to keep people safe. Sometimes we need to give them, quite explicit instructions to keep them safe within this environment. And sometimes we need to keep people, we need to look after their motivation. And so my reflection on that was that there's still quite a lot of confusion about it being two different ways of operating with the same version of reality, maybe is one way of putting it, rather than two versions of reality where you might do the same things, but for different reasons.
Yeah, no, I think that I agree, Marianne. I get the same. That's one of the biggest things I think we would want to emphasize, right? It's not a tweak to a different way to do drills or something, right? It's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
So
just to finish off, so I think really my reflection, and it follows on from what I said, I think at the end of the last one, that we really need to try and understand what the lived reality is of the coaches and the developers we're working with, that we're sort of producing stuff for, and try and support them to understand the different those sort of two different theoretical perspectives, but allow them to make their own decisions and to work their way through it. I think it's something that you need to explore and play with. And I think the last thing actually on this is there was a little bit of feedback about, you have to be really, is it just that people are really clever? There's long words and it's complex. And actually, again, my reflections on that is I think actually it's about almost going back to trying to look at the world like a child again. It's completely the opposite, to just let go of all the complicated stuff and just look at the world with fresh eyes, and curiosity. Again, so it's not I think the hard bit is to let go, but it's not hard.
No. Tyler, do you want to, your thoughts?
Yeah, certainly. I'll jump in there. I echo a lot of what Marianne shared. Thank you once again for having me on. I've thought about it quite a bit, and I actually took yesterday and then this morning and listened to the entire conversation again. I think a lot of you were on the entire time, or everyone, for the exception of myself. I think I hopped off early, which was like an hour and a half into the conversation. So I actually listened again to the back half of it again. So a couple things that I thought about. I think number one, and these are in no particular order, but number one, I think we being the entire community, needs to put to bed the terminology is hard conversation and argument. I think we just need to acknowledge that it's part of skill acquisition and learning and development and control and the regulation of movement on both sides, regardless of how you view learning. And so I feel like that just needs to be kind of put to the side, and this is just part of it, and let's move along, because that is the stem of a lot of these arguments. And so that's my first kind of just reflection point from something I had shared, but then also just through conversations with individuals on both sides of the fence, let's call it. That'd be number one. Number two, some of the conversations I've had with athletes regarding this prior to our conversation and then post conversation has been, it challenges me because of the shaping of my task and my intention with the task, or how I view how I should go about undertaking what I'm trying to accomplish. And so maybe that it is challenging for them because they go from maybe their position coach to maybe a strength and conditioning coach, or they're transitioning amongst departments, and they're kind of being guided or shaped in different ways. And so it's sometimes challenging for them because it's limiting, it constrains the way that they go about acting. And so I've reflected on that substantially, because it's no hiding that obviously I try to approach this from an ecological viewpoint, but I think that it's appropriate where we need to at least reach out to other academics and other practitioners to try to find some type of middle ground, if it exists there, in order for it to be more appropriate for the athletes. And that's an ongoing conversation. But that was one other point there. The guiding conversations. So I think that both you and Stuart, and I think, I guess a lot of us, and then through emergence, through our outlets, through movement meetup calls and the like, trying to have outlets that allow for us to have genuine, open conversation where no one feels like they're going to be attacked. And I know that was something that we've all said we want to get better at, but I think genuinely approaching conversations with that idea in mind is something that I would like to do moving forward. And so, reaching out and like inviting people onto calls that are from that perspective. And then last but not least, kind of piggybacking on something that Marianne mentioned just there, and this is something that's been shared with me by both athletes and academics, as well as other practitioners, is these ideas transcend sport. And so it's not just these coaching models, because that was something that I was told as well. And I said, let's unpack that a little bit more, and then getting to the realization that this is more than just a model of coaching. There may be models that exist within the theory that are underpinned by the theory, but they're actual ways in which we interact with the world around us. And so for me, giving examples of other ways, from the stock market to the way in which traffic flows to bird flocks and things of that nature, there was the understanding that, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And then, as I think Stuart, you've said a number of times, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so it just like gives them an opportunity to find their own way after that. Those are just a few of my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think those are great, Tyler. And I agree with the terminology one is something I'll talk more about what I want to do. Is kind of, I believe in this. This is what this is. And I want to move on. If you don't want to come with me, that's okay. But I'm not going to compromise to keep you, like try to drag you with me. That I don't know if that comes across harsh, but I want to develop this theory in all its expanded glory, right? Not try to dumb it down and, into people. So, if you don't want to come all along, then that's okay. It's totally okay. Craig, what what were your thoughts from?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me back, Rob. Yeah, fascinating few weeks, actually. Definitely the worldview type analogies that we used last time out are true for me. Definitely seeing my entire existence and engagement with the environment and people very differently, and yeah, very curious about that. And I think I've noticed other people are starting to engage in my micro world around the sport we work in canoe slalom quite a lot, more noticing more bankside coaching about skill acquisition, skill development, whether it's from a particular stance point in this sort of debate or not. I think people are getting curious to explore different things. And I'm conscious that I think we have to be very careful from wherever you sit in these positions, is that sometimes comes across as a hard choice that you need to make. And that's how it can come across from people, of whether we like it or not, perceived sort of hierarchical differential. And I think that can be quite constraining to being able to then engage and explore if we're demanding a choice quite early on in people's development, or that sense of, we talked late last time about meeting people where they're at. And I think being mindful of our biases, but not looking to impose at that point. So yeah, I had some fascinating conversations for my early journey in EcoD, like challenging me on, and I always wish Andrew's on my shoulder at this point, but he's not been there yet. I'm still looking out for him. Challenging me on, well, what's an ecological explanation for this? Or, how would they view this? I did say they quite often, by the way. Careful with that. So yeah, really fascinating. Been really enjoying some debates and sharing research and stuff, which is quite novel for our world, I'll be honest. So pretty happy with that. And my final, having listened to it back on a long run the other day, I just wished I was in Carl's world. I wish I was a player in Carl's team. Because this sense of knowing as you go is, and all the work that's around Ingold and the guys' work around with Keith Davids and stuff is just, yeah, fascinating me. And definitely in my mentoring program that I'm on as well, it's beginning to kind of align and shape my journey through that as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So some great curiosity and interactions going on, Rob. And I think, like you say, it's how we engage in that space to not necessarily bring people with us, but just explore the space together.
Yeah, no, that's good. And that's a good segue link to, we have that coming up too. Going to discuss Ingold. And that's a great, if you read that, and I don't know how you could read that and not see it's a big, all-encompassing idea. That it's not little tweak to coaching. It's really big. So okay, go, if that's a good segue to Carl, what is your
Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to come back into your podcast, Rob. Yeah, everything everyone said thus far, I don't think any of us would disagree with. There's probably the big interactions that I've had off the back of it probably really relate fundamentally to Marianne's points about. And to back in the Summer Craig's on it being a worldview. Like I think this issue we find tends to sit methodological. So to use like another analogy, I think we're looking too high up the tree where these debates are sitting, and that's why we're getting this mass confusion. That's why we're getting this, like, you have to do this, or you mean direct instruction doesn't work in an ecological dynamics framework or an ecological world. So what do you mean I can't tell athletes, or what do you mean I can't create safe environments by telling them not to go and do those things? But that's a methodological lens, and the issues that we're encountering are much deeper than that. They're roots of the tree that we need to look at. And once you start to look at the roots of those trees, you start to then view these sticky-ish areas that historically sit within non-ecological worlds can actually fit quite comprehensively in an ecological approach or an ecological worldview, but it has to sit within how you view the world, right? So from that perspective, to give listeners an example, like storytelling, right, historically is a bit of a sticky area for an ecological approach, and without opening a can of worms, from an ecological lens, storytelling wouldn't be a way to consolidate a representation for someone, but it would be a way to draw them into your world, to help things become more apparent. So to help guide their attention, to help interact or facilitate that interaction between them and the landscape. But again, that point emphasises much more of a theoretical or a worldview perspective, which these debates, I think, are happening methodologically, which is why coaches come out thinking, I have to, I can't use those approaches because they're not, within an ecological dynamics framework. They're off. And obviously, the minute you tell someone they can't do something, they're gonna push back against that. So we actually need to look further down. And I think that's an onus on both sides. When I say both sides, I mean practitioners and scientists. I think we need to make that really apparent in the research that we do, and bring that to the forefront. But that's kind of been my big point of dwelling on this, which has led to some work we're working on at the moment, where we actually show, look, it's not that these arguments or these approaches that the coaches feel don't sit within an ecological dynamics framework. That's not it at all. We actually need to look further down, and we need to attack the roots of the problem, which is just a worldview. And then to pick up your point, Rob, on you can come along with me or you don't have to. That really resonates with me, because there's an odd paradox or an odd irony associated with an ecological approach, is that if I tell you an ecological approach is the way that you have to view the world, well, I'm kind of disregarding the ecological approach, right? I'm kind of pushing back against the fundamental laws of the theoretical worldview that I view. And I had a great chat with a colleague yesterday morning on this exact thing. If I'm really passionate about helping someone take up with an ecological approach, I need to walk with them and guide their attention and let them stumble across these ideas themselves, and then provide some guidance and some nurturance when or if needed. It is not to give you a template or a model or a book that has procedures that says this is how you have to view the world. I think we'll all agree that we've all, and a lot of people that reside within an ecological approach tend to stumble across it themselves and follow the lines of inquiry that open up. So then our job as scientists or practitioners or coach developers is to respond to people that want to start to pay attention towards these views that might be slightly different to what they've been exposed to before. So that's probably the two areas. Look at the roots of the tree, and we need to guide and walk with people that are genuinely interested, and respond to those people that are genuinely interested to want to know a little bit more as they go.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points, Carl. And back to Ingold, he has a great part. He's talking about parenting, but it's the same thing of it's showing, not telling, right? It's giving people experiences and educating. So I think we're pretty good at that, but I think we continue moving forward. I think that's something you're right. I think we need to continue with that model, showing people and a lot of people, one thing I've heard a lot of call for is more examples of things, CLA in practice, differential learning, which that's exactly what that is, right? Showing people rather than telling them this is how you do it. One of the best ways you can show is give you people, and I know lots of people on here are doing that. So I think that's really good. Stuart, what are your
reflections wise? Yeah, it's been quite interesting. The response has been quite interesting. I've had some responses from people whereby they don't want to talk to me anymore, which is a bit disappointing. But I guess one of the things that I think was important, and I kind of did a bit of a walk and talk to myself while I was out walking the dog one morning to sort of make sense of this a little bit, which I haven't actually published yet, and I'm still not sure I ever will. But one of the things I was reflecting on was perhaps a misunderstanding that people might have, which is that they may feel as if, and this came also from some other feedback I'd had from some people, they may feel as if it's like it's sort of our way or the highway, or if you're not on board, just don't even start. And I think that's a misunderstanding people have about when Rob, you did the which I believe is a great service to the world of coaching theory, the incompatibility video. People then, I think, somehow have managed to either misrepresent or misunderstand that as being a situation where you're either in this camp or you're in this camp, and that's being presented as, kind of a dualistic position. And I don't genuinely think that is the case here. No one's saying, look, you either need to get on board or don't. All we're trying to say is that the way to think about these things means that it's quite difficult to square things together. But that doesn't mean that you have to be all in from day one. And I've used this analogy before, which is, I think of it a little bit like swimming. And I think some people think that what we're saying is you just got to jump in the deep end and then hope you're going to swim, which I can imagine for a lot of people is like, whoa, how do I know I'm going to? And all those sorts, what if I drown? And what if everybody else drowns with me? And all those sorts of things. And I don't think anyone's saying that. Everyone's saying, look, it's fine. No one's saying you have to jump in the deep end. No one's even saying you have to start swimming, so to speak. But what we are saying is you have to get in the water. You can't like just dangle your feet in. You can't stand on the outside like my wife does when we're on holiday and like pretend she's going to get in until I get in and then never actually get in. You can't do that. What you've got to do is you've actually got to get in and have a swim. Now, what we're not saying is you have to be like only ecological from the outset. No one is saying that either. What we're saying is that there are some fundamentals and some principles about an ecological approach, which then bring into question why you might do certain things. And I really like the tree metaphor that Carl used, because I think that really maps on. I can't remember who it was, but I remember a PhD student talking to me about the way that they were articulating a coaching philosophy, and they used a tree metaphor for this, which is to say that the roots are kind of where, it's what gives you stability. It's what you hold on to. It's the thing that maintains the tree's ability to withstand, environmental influences. And that's what so my roots are, I'm embedded in an ecological perspective around how we're going to engage in the interaction with other humans around some kind of learning experience that we're going to be co-designing. Now, the trunk of the tree obviously has a little bit more flex in terms of because we haven't got all the answers, so I'm going to flex a little bit with that, because there are times when I can't do anything else because I haven't got the answers in the science. So you've got to try and start flexing with that. But then when it comes to the branches and the leaves, that's all far more dynamic, right? So they're changing all the time. And that's what I think about the method. I think of the method in that way, because there are definitely times I was working with my daughter in the back garden, lockdown, and doing some hockey stuff. And she was definitely not able to grasp a little concept. So it required me to share with her an idea, which you might say is not purely ecological, but in that moment in time was the right thing to do for that individual. And then we go straight back into the environmental scenario for her to then just make that next leap. Now, some would say, oh, well, you're not being truly ecological. You're not being true to your principles. I absolutely am. My roots are still absolutely embedded there. But every now and again, because of the moment in time, I'm going to use these. Now, that doesn't mean I'm polytheoretical. What that means is that, so people are assuming that we're like, you're not being pragmatic. You're being too constrained down one path. No one's saying that. All we're saying is, if you're going to look at this through a theoretical lens, which is then going to inform your practice, at least be committed to that, and then utilize that as a means by which to explore the way your practice might evolve and change, etc., etc. Don't say, well, today my roots are in here, and tomorrow my roots are going to be there. You really can't philosophically. That's not a coaching philosophy, is it? That's just saying I'm pretty much going to do whatever happens, given whatever moment, given whatever situation. And I don't think that gives you any grounding. And I'm not sure. I struggle a little bit, being a bit of an ethics geek, what the morality of that is. And I'm not going to cast aspersions on people's morality for not having roots and this, that, and the other. But it'd be an interesting ethical discussion around, just saying, oh, I'm going to hop into this, hop into that, hop into the other, whatever works in any moment in time. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, I've been rambling on too much, but they're just a few thought fragments that kind of occurred to me as a result of the last discussion.
No, that's great, Stuart. And Andrew, well, last but not least.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, thanks for everything. So the first thing I think I was thinking about reflecting on this was, je ne regrette rien, right? I think that was a conversation as a group. I think it was quite a good conversation for us to have had and to have had it in public, and just kind of, I feel like we needed to go through that before we could have a conversation about moving forwards. We needed to kind of get some of those frustrations out of the way and just identify that actually it bugs us when, a lot of these problems are, brought up and all that sort of stuff. And this idea of popping around and putting your roots in different places at different times, like, it's important that bugs us, and it's important, I think, that everybody knows that it does bug us. So I think at that level, I think that conversation, I think, was an important one. But yeah, right, obviously, you need to find sort of the thing to do first, the thing to do next, rather. And I was thinking about a couple of things. So, the thing that, one of the big things that always comes up in these arguments, when they are turning into arguments, is that there's always, well, you're not allowed to do X within the ecological approach, or, if you're using verbal instruction or whatever. And again, it was just, I think one of the things that we can do positively is to take some of those things as challenges, right? You say, you know what, you're right. Right now, the ecological approach doesn't actually have a good, coherent way to talk about how to use verbal instruction in coping pedagogy. But we should probably get onto that, because that's a really interesting question. And obviously, we're all linguistic and language-using sort of creatures, so it's clearly important. So one of the things I think we need to do is that some of these challenges are just being a bit dickish and a bit straw manning, but a lot of them are like, well, look, I want to be able to talk to my athletes. How do I do it ecologically? We just need to front up and say, actually, no, we need to do some work on these things. We haven't got there yet, and just be honest about that. And then say no, but also we were thinking about taking it sort of further. And sort of on that front, the other thing that I've just been thinking about kind of endlessly. So I haven't had a chance to read the other Ingold book that you're going to do the Journal Club on, but I came across this other one of his, right?
Mm-hmm.
In which he's basically taking a slightly ecological approach to classroom education. And this is a thing that's been on my mind for quite a long time. And so it's occurred to me that reading this and thinking, and I'm talking to a couple of people now as well, that I can't remember who it was. Somebody mentioned that this isn't just a theory of skill acquisition in physical skills in a physical environment, right? In principle, we think the ecological approach should has consequences and implications across the board. So let's think about, well, what do we know about skill acquisition in the classroom, in which you're not learning to do a physical skill within a constrained physical environment, but which you're trying to learn to do a non-physical skill, in which either sometimes the physical environment's been constrained, but also the verbal, social, cultural environment has been constrained in certain ways. And so Tim Ingold's book is interesting. It's full of interesting, very ecologically minded ideas about framing that. I've had a lovely conversation with a Montessori practitioner, thinking about just the kinds of things that Montessori schools do and why they do it, right? And a lot of it is around rearranging physical environments and layouts and things like that. But it's occurred to me actually that, right, if we think about this, I'm busy thinking about how to articulate what goes on in a classroom ecologically. It's occurred to me that one of the ways that this, I think, could be a really interesting place to go forward. The coaching literature has spent a great deal of time figuring out how to manipulate and constrain the physical environment in order to facilitate the emergence of physical skills, right? And then there's education. There are various kinds of educational sort of thing that emphasize this to various ways. But effectively, all those theories of classroom education are fundamentally about trying to figure out how to develop the acquisition of non-physical skills through the manipulation of non-physical elements of the environment. And so what I think is that there's a complementarity there. I think the ecological dynamics coaching literature is a long way ahead, because it's been working very explicitly from that theoretical base and having those conversations. But educational systems like Montessori and some of these other have been thinking about this as well for a long time. And like I say, I'm just sort of getting into it, but I suspect that an interesting way forward will be to try and have a look and see and just interpret and talk about what they're doing, ecologically, so that we don't actually have to reinvent the wheel when we try and initiate a research program that tries to identify how to use language ecologically. So yeah, it's a half sort of thought, but it's the thing that's been kind of consuming me ever since, is that, do you know what? Everyone's right to be cranky at us about instruction, about how we use it, because we don't really have a good answer. We have some half-thought answers, but we don't sort of have a, and I'm sure there's lots of good sort of ideas, but we don't have a programmatic answer in the same way that you have a slightly more programmatic answer about how to manipulate and constrain physical environment. So I think the way to take this forward is for us to take the challenge and then go looking for domains in which we can learn and get a foot into figuring out how to actually do this ecologically. Because the more I think about it, the more I think actually there's no reason why not. It's just that we haven't done it yet, and it's just hard, right? So, but yeah, I think that's a lot of the things that have been really kind of dominant. And the one other thing I think, just sort of politically, I think this has come up as well. You know, when I was in Aberdeen doing a postdoc and working with clinicians and kids with DCD, like one of the things I learned that surprised me was that the clinicians were afraid that we were going to come into their clinics and tell them that what they were doing was wrong, us academics, right? And it had never really occurred to us, but it was a thing that they were genuinely afraid of that made them really hesitant to work with us. And I think in some ways, Tim Buck says that the coaching world is the same way, right? We're going to come down, we're going to descend from our ivory tower and say, well, you're doing it wrong, and here's this N=20 study that proves it, right? And I get that. So we also have to manage those feelings and manage those expectations that people are talking about meeting people where they are. It's real, right? We have to worry about that. But also, again, we do actually have something to offer, right? The vocabulary is an important issue, and if you want to do this properly, you better learn it. Step up and do a few things, right? We can help, but also we have a place at the table, but we do have to remember, and also we're not going to convince the old people, quite frankly. That never happens. Why? Because they've spent a long time doing it differently, and it's hard to switch. And if somebody tried to convince me that the ecological approach was wrong, I have a lot of sunk cost in this now, right? And I know that, and that academically shows up all the time as well. So the other thing for us to do is, actually some of these fights are kind of pointless. We can just crack on and do it and train a whole bunch of new people to do it. And you know, that's how you take over the world, quite frankly. And it gets it away from those pointless fights as well. It sounds like an evil plan, and it is a little bit of an evil plan, but also it's just acknowledging that these fights are never actually going to solve any problems. But if we do want to do things, then we can just crack on, do our thing, listen for the good challenges, come up with good ideas, solve those problems for people so that they see the value. And, you know, we win when we outlive them and have more grad students or coaches than them. You know?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so my thanks everyone. Those are lots of good, you know, similar things. I'll just give you my, so I've got a lot of feedback, a lot of emails and messages about that episode, and I would say mild regret in a way after doing it. Part of it because I'm a non-confrontational Canadian, right? If you've hung around Canadians at all, we can't go 5 minutes without apologizing for something. Most of what we didn't do, so we're not usually good at that. So, but overall, I thought it was very good. There's a couple things though that people expressed to me, and I felt too. One is, and I think they come from good sources, but we have to be careful about them. And they come from, most of us that are in this approach are very passionate, super passionate about it. One of the things that comes across sometimes, and particularly in talking about youth sports, because the ecological approach is naturally more engaging, more inclusive, all these things, so that if you don't do it, you're a bad person. Right, that message sometimes comes across like you're not an ethical person if you're in the pipeline mode of youth academies, right? If you don't follow the ecological approach, which I don't think, you know, we're not saying that at all, right? The other thing is, you know, I express this on Twitter. Sometimes I think, Andrew, I can get a little over enthusiastic about theory, because it took me 15 years before any coaches in my area would listen to me for a minute, right? So I want to express there's this other side to this. Like, so I hope you don't make, you know, so the other comment I got is making people feel dumb. Like, because if you don't use a theory, you're not smart. And again, that's not something we want to put across. So I think there's sometimes, and part of it, this is another point in using Stuart's analogy of the swimming. Part of the challenge we have is everybody's on this dock of where they grew up on, right? A traditional learning. So we have to pull really hard to get them off of it. And that's one of the, so kind of, I thank everyone for the reflection. So kind of moving to the next, where to go from here. One of the things I want to, for me, and I'm sure Andrew has experience with this in writing, is, and this is another very Canadian thing, defining you by what you're not, right? So I'm getting tired of always starting every conversation about ecological psychology by critiquing information processing and saying what's wrong with it. It's tiresome, it's repetitive, and it comes across as negative. I think that I want to start, here's Gibson, here's Bernstein. You don't need to know how you go read if you want to see how it connects. So I'm getting tired. I want to move away from that myself and try. It's very hard because, again, everybody's on this dock and you're trying to pull them into the water. But so I don't know what people, maybe Andrew, I'm sure you've had lots of experience with that.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that over the years as well, because I've written those papers as well, and I've just gotten frustrated with it. I've kind of made a conscious decision to stop doing it for exactly that reason, because, and again, it's almost, it does nothing but frame everything negatively. And I really just think that we win by just cracking on and doing good things. In our science and in the way that we're portraying things. And you do that by just doing good work, I think, at one level, and talking about it effectively and making sure, being reflective and listening to people. Like I say, the challenge about verbal instruction is a good challenge. We need to acknowledge that it's a good challenge. But we should then use that to just crack on and do a whole bunch of work. And then maybe in those papers, who cares about direct instruction from an information processing point of view? The question is actually, well, here's how we would like to conceptualize the use of verbal instruction from a constraints-based approach. Let's just crack straight into it. And I tend to think I think those papers are always a little bit more interesting. There's that feeling like you have to have the whole history of the literature in your introduction section. And it's like, and some papers you do, that's fine. But I think for the most part, and because guess what? No one else does that.
No. Daniel Wolpert doesn't get asked by reviewers to add a paragraph on Gibson. I can guarantee you. Reverse all the time. I've had 2 or 3 times where I've written papers where purely ecological framework, and I've been asked to add a paragraph about information approach, because that's it. So
I think that's where some of the frustration comes from, a little bit for me as well, which is I guess it's this understanding. You talk about people being on the dock and kind of pulling people in and how hard you have to work. Well, I think that's one of my other reflections is, kind of why am I in the world of, talking about this and interested in it and sharing ideas about this and, and all that sort of stuff. And part of the reason is because, I'm passionate about the approach mainly because, I've had some personal experiences, what I consider to be quite negative experiences. And I think others should experience this, and they don't get to experience it because it's not part of mainstream education. And I'm not just talking about coach education. I'm talking about education in its fullest sense. It's all based on entirely different models. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us that quite a lot of people they see it as very kind of avant-garde and very kind of niche and a little bit out there and a bit extreme. And I suppose it's then easy then for someone who perhaps has got a vested interest in the maintenance of the status quo to then paint that picture. It's a bit extreme. I see. Now they're just saying that you've got to be with them, and if you're not with them, you don't get their stuff, and off you go. And I want to be really, really clear here that no one, if I'm honest, one of the realizations I've come to is I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. If you don't like it, that's cool. If you don't like what I say about it, that's cool too. You know, I had a podcast guest who is watching tonight, Andrea Enric, who was unequivocal about his perspective on drills. He's probably even more extreme on drills than I am. I'm finally found somebody, right? But you know, that he can make that kind of statement, he can make that kind of case, and he's got that. He can articulate that. Why? Because he's not that bothered about whether anybody really gets on board or not. And I've got to get a little bit less bothered when someone pushes back. If they push back, that's cool, right? That's fine. I'm not going to then get into a long-winded discussion with anybody. I'm not going to engage somebody on that because I'm not trying to convince them. All I'm going to do is continue to share ideas and have great conversations with people like yourselves. And if people find value in that and it's something they can go and explore, then that's amazing. I'm just not. So I'm going to create a space for them to learn and explore. And that's all brilliant. I'm not going to try and drag anyone in. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm not going to have a go at anybody who's doing it differently. They can do what they want to do and they can do it differently. I might want to present an alternative just so that people are aware that there is an alternative, because no one gets told there's an alternative. But that's not to say that when anybody's doing anything wrong. It's just to say, do you realize there's an alternative? Now, some people take that as you're doing it wrong, but I don't mean it that way. I promise. I'm just saying there's an alternative. Yeah. Sorry, Marianne. I know you're going to come in.
That's a great viewpoint, and I that's another thing I've tried to. I'm going to try. I don't do this too much more anymore. I'm trying to avoid jumping in, like especially on Twitter and things, and on threads like the thread where they're talking about visual training with, perceptual training that I've million times have expressed my view. I don't like it, so I'm not going to jump in and say. But I think you can, right, Stuart? I agree. It's a very delicate line, though. You're right to do on Twitter or something, suggesting alternative versus saying, not coming across sarcastically. Well, if you want to do it correctly, this is how you do it. So, but I think that's a good attitude, definitely. Marianne, did you want to?
Yeah. Thanks. I should just think about some of the stuff you were saying about the research as well, actually, because as you know, with my research, I'm with Keith, but also with Hartbury. So I had the equine side, and with Hartbury, there's an equine division that is very behaviorist and very much a very, very behaviorist collapse the individual, focus on the equine, and a sports department that seems to be quite IP, but also quite games based. And although I was linked to the sports department, I was also with the equine, and I kind of thought, you know what, I've spent 1.5 years just trying to justify why I'm not going to use an IP perspective for a horse. and justifying using an ecological approach. I'm like, and I was trying, I kept trying to go, that's not my PhD. I'm not justifying an ecological approach. As far as I'm concerned, that's kind of been done and dusted. There's lots being done. I want to move on with what I'm doing, and I have ended up switching over so that my primary is then with Sheffield and Keith, and my sort of external supervisor is at Hartbury, just because there was still so much pressure there, and this is about even writing a paper. I'm just like, I can't, this is so draining to be pulled back, to have to justify all of that. And I think maybe you're right, that does create a bit of frustration, because if I was going to do it in an IP or just purely behaviorist perspective, I just go, this is my ontological back, this is what I'm using from this is, and it's like, oh great, happy days, off you go. But I'm just like, 1.5 years my PhD, you're kidding me. I mean, I know it's part-time. It's exhausting, That I think on the plus side as well, one of the things I'd like to say is that, I mean, as most of you all know, on Friday, our coach developer conversation, we had Alex Laskew. She's brilliant. I was a little worried because she is just like this firebomb, isn't she? Came off, and I was like, oh my God, I feel like I've just had 5 double espressos and I'm not going to get sleep. And it's great. She's just amazing. But I was slightly worried that people that kind of weren't as embedded within this would have been lost. But the feedback has been phenomenal from that. And I have so many people I talk to as well who just go, they say things like, we've been engaging in the stuff that you've been doing in the last year, this with UK coaching, and certainly not just me at all, but within just thinking differently and not feeling pressured to think differently. And they're saying, and it's transformed the way I think about the world. Something like, just like, oh my God, this is just really exciting, and I'm not feeling stressed about it, but I'm really enjoying, just engaging differently in what I'm doing. So I had a lot of really nice conversations like that as well.
Yeah. So I'm getting a theme here. I agree with a lot of I wanted to ask, I'll ask Tyler about this next, about trying to focus more on developing and growing the area and less on bridging and convincing. If I'm getting so Tyler, since you have a company that's educational, what are your kind of thoughts on those kind of relative? I know you on those kind of relative points. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the question. There are a couple of things. Actually, I was jotting down as you guys were discussing these topics. I think in some ways with the creation of Emergence, yes, we wanted to share ideas, to Stuart's point, that aren't oftentimes shared, whether it's in academia, whether it's just in conversation, just like hearing essentially one side. So that was part of the creation. But on the other side of it, it was really just about trying a different way of viewing not only sport, but the world, and sharing it with other people just to be informative and not worrying about, well, there's this side and there's this side. It's just more like, this is how we go about utilizing this on a daily basis. And I say we because everyone within the team at Emergence, we all come from a practitioner background. Yes, Sean and myself are now doing our doctoral studies with Keith and with Will as our external. And so we're doing that now, but it came from this is what we do on a daily basis. And this is what's worked well. This is what we've struggled with, from verbal communication to setting up constraints and seeing them being manipulated in a purposeful way, and just sharing it with other people, and being able to see what's fruitful from it. So more the direction that we are now moving. We just launched the Movement Academy. And one thing I wanted to add from that, that we have gotten actually from a number of the individuals, which I think is a way forward for everyone, all the listeners out there, and all of us as well. And this has been a comment from a couple of different individuals. I just love. We asked them, like, what are you looking to take away? Why did you join the academy? Goal setting, that type of conversation. And they said, I have gotten the most out of learning from other coaches that are not in my particular area of study. So I'm wanting to learn, and this was like being shared from a badminton coach. Like, I don't want to learn from people. I mean, not that I don't want to, like, he wants to learn from people in badminton, but I want to learn from American football. I want to learn from basketball, because it's almost like it's a chance for you to go, I don't know. So I'm willing to learn, and people are more open and sensitive, almost like a skill intentionality of learning and within academics. So that's something I want to share as a way forward, kind of like a suggestion that I'm kind of giving myself as well, but also all the listeners, is reach out to someone in your area that is from a different sport, and just, ask to have genuine conversation, whether it's on the phone, in person. This is a cheap plug, but it's honestly something that he's been doing for a while. Sean just wrote Mover of the Year. He's been doing football beyond the stats for a long time. And I mean, not only has he been doing it for over a decade, but he's literally talking about how this exists daily with higher level athletes. Yes, I know that sometimes is challenging, but we have a paper coming out where there's case studies and showing how this exists with high school athletes as well. And so, like, dig into some of that, have genuine conversation with people on calls, where I think people from an ecological perspective are willing to say, we just want to talk about what we do, and if it works for you, then wonderful, let's have an open discussion. The other thing I would say is, from kind of piggybacking on the last part, as far as like the reason and kind of the way forward, other than having open conversations with individuals, I know for me personally, I'm going to stop trying to defend why I'm doing what I'm doing, and then just try to openly share, but then be willing to have the discussion if someone says, well, I do it this way, does this work? And rather than me saying, no, don't do it that way, like, that's really unique. And I think I do this okay, but I think everybody could probably get better, myself included. That's really unique, asking them to unpack maybe why, or how else could you go about accomplishing that in a different way, and like genuinely ask, but not in a condescending way, but like genuinely ask, how could you? So then in that way, we're kind of guiding the conversation, much in the same way like you would from an ecological approach in coaching, but you're doing that with a practitioner. And I think that there are a lot of forums that do that. So those are just some of my thoughts, but I think the biggest one is like the awesome feedback from not only individuals in the academy, but other individuals that we've engaged with, is reach out to someone in your area, or maybe even abroad, being the fact that we can reach people in that way that is not from your area of expertise, and just say, can you walk me through kind of why you do what you do and how you go about doing so?
Yeah, no, that's great, Tyler. That made me think of something. Yeah, that I'm going to go to Carl next, because I think this is getting in his wheelhouse. That it's very meta. We're all doing the ecological approach to learn about the ecological approach. Like, to go a little inside, we have a group we chat with, discussion, and it's called the Ecological Explorers, right? I think genuinely we're all here to explore, not to teach or instruct or inform. Like, I know I do a bunch of one-on-one things with people, mentoring things. And I always say thank you to them at the end, because I get as much out of it as they do. I feel like, because talking about it, I'm still learning, exploring, and so I think this is getting into Carl's wheelhouse of kind of what, this meta overall arching thing of the ecological approach.
Yeah, there's really sick points coming out of this discussion. I guess from Tyler's perspective, I'll pick up your thread in a sec, Rob, because that's super important too. Tyler's perspective bodes really beautifully to a bugbear of mine in academia, and that's the lack of transdisciplinary research, right? It's a real frustration that disciplines have all the answers to things, and that's not the case, right? It shouldn't be the case that this discipline has a specific way of doing and being, and all research in that area is framed by that particular worldview. So then evidently you end up creating research that's telling the same thing, just in a slightly different way, but it's telling you the same thing over and over and over, and it's because it's formed off of those disciplinary ways of doing. So actually breaking those disciplinary shackles off and actually following the inquiry that opens as it emerges is the most important thing. It's something that I push hard with young research students is, venture outside of sport, venture outside of skill acquisition, or venture outside of movement sciences, and go and look at some of the ways of viewing the world that other disciplines have, and some of the debates that they're subsequently having. And then you start to work out, really coincidentally, Andrew, same book sitting right next to me, you start to work out that these people in these other areas are having almost the same debates that we're having here. And then you start to realize, geez, if we start to connect some of these worldviews together that fundamentally reside within an ecological approach, we get some really quirky and unique ways of being and doing that are so different to what we've been exposed to before. So again, that point of progressing and building this framework forward, my way of doing that is in a different way. Is in a way of kind of promoting this notion of going out and exploring beyond the world of sport, and that's going to take you into some quirky areas. It's going to take reviewers that are responsive to that. It's going to take journals and editors that are embracive of that, and it's going to take readers that genuinely go, you know what, these ideas sound pretty weird, but I'm going to actually give it the time to navigate through, because, like Tyler's point, I've got something to learn from everybody or everything I read, and I'm going to go follow those lines of inquiry that subsequently open up. But yeah, I think it's a way for me at least to view positively or a way forward with an ecological approach. To kind of push the boundaries and think a little bit differently about some of these ideas. And the most influential work for me, it may have started in Gibson and Bernstein and even more contemporarily Duarte, Keith, these other people, but it's going in a vastly different direction. And that's not because someone's telling me to go in that direction. It's because I'm following the things that interest me, or the lines of inquiry that open up as you subsequently go. And I think if we adopt that approach, generally speaking, with regards to athletes that we work with coaches that we work with other practitioners, with other scientists, with papers that we read, if we actually genuinely just let ourselves, sit patiently in experimentation and wait for these things to open up, we start to become really responsive to things. Your point about saying thank you at the end then to the people that you work with, Rob, I absolutely love, because for me, education is about leading out together and walking together. It's not about you going, look, hey, I've got all the answers. You sit and listen for an hour as I tell you what you need to do, right? Now, that's obviously really extreme view. And I wonder at times if that's a bit straw man. I at least haven't been exposed to too many coaches that follow that approach, but there is still undertones of that, and I think we still need to push back against those undertones and view education much more as a process of leading out. And as we lead out together, we become responsive together. You know, we look at things together. I listen to your perspectives. I explain my perspectives. We respond. We find that common ground or that commoning, and then we subsequently go off and explore another landscape together. So your point of saying thank you is really apparent in that you've appreciated that what someone has, the experiences that someone has shared with you, are indeed something that can help shape your way forward and your progression forward. But if you're stuck in that hierarchical transition model of knowledge and education, well, of course you're not going to say thank you to someone that you don't think you've been able to receive anything from. And again, it's a pretty extreme view of education, but it's one that I'm super passionate about driving ecological dynamics or an ecological approach into, is this notion of education being a much more reciprocal approach that demands a so Jan Mascheline talks about it as like a weak pedagogy. Biesta talks about it as like a strong approach to education. I like to look at it, you know, these approaches in an ecological dynamics or an ecological worldview demand a loud, those that don't demand a loud, and those that reside within it demand a soft approach to pedagogy. And that soft approach to pedagogy is about guiding, about attending, and about responding to things together. Now that's ourselves as we read papers and as we navigate through these areas, and that's about with people that we work with and athletes that we interact with. It's a much more softer process. It's one of guiding, nurturing, and assisting, whereas the louder approaches tend to be off-putting for me, at least, which is like reading a paper that's like, I've no one's done this before, and I tend to disagree pretty hard with those types of those worldviews, because they all, I think you said it, Rob, they're all based off of something. You know, we all originate from somewhere, as opposed to thinking that we have all the answers ourselves. So yeah, lots of things that I've kind of just brain dumped into that. So
No, that's good stuff.
Would you mind if I add one thing? I promise I'll keep it under 30 seconds.
No, go for it.
One thing I want to say, which with what what Carl was saying there, is the fact that what's fantastic about it, and I just want to openly admit, so I felt like I'd been viewing the world in different ways before, but I have found myself in the past 3 to 6 months, I've been having, conversations with Carl, actually with James Rudd and a couple other individuals, and Carl's the one that turned me on to Tim and Gold, and ever since he has, like, literally in the past not even 2 months, I will stop in the middle of like hiking, and I'm like messaging and something like, oh my gosh, like this is just so cool, and it's like freeing in so many ways. So I just want to echo the fact that for coaches out there that are, and academics out there that are interested in maybe seeing how these ideas exist in the world in general, that can allow you to kind of, let your head down a little bit, just relax about the ideas, look into areas that are completely separate than sport. So I couldn't echo that anymore. So.
Yeah. No, I think
I'll jump on the back of that, Rob, if I may. Sorry, just to thread a few things together. Like my own personal experience of being introduced to the ecological approach wasn't anywhere in my sporting existence. Like the hook that got me on is it really spoke to me as a person first, in terms of my existence here in this body, and how I want to be engaged, how I want to engage others. And I think I'm curious, like sitting on Alex's session, Marianne, last week, and definitely the way Carl writes with Keith and others, it's not the sporting, like, practitioner side in me that's initially engaged. It's the person-centered side, and I think Alex did that really well. And this isn't to boo-hoo the more sort of academic research approach, but I think if we're starting to engage a broader audience, if we start with like people, I mean, generally people have a good intention towards other people. I'm probably over trusting in that view maybe, but I think that got people on the hook with Alex, right? And when I read Carl's papers about wayfinding, it speaks to me as an individual, as a person in an environment, any environment. And then I begin to, and then we get into direct perception, and then I start thinking about how that like influences my life. Like someone asked me the other day, like, and I think, Rob, this is the sort of conversations I've been having. It's like, okay, if we cut through all the academia, what practical difference has it made to your coaching? And I think the most strong answer I had after kind of flapping for a little bit was actually language, Andrew. As difficult as it might be for us to research that area, it was actually, I think, language and converse between me and others has been the biggest shift. And it probably come from being got on the hook from a person-centered approach and then towards skill development and acquisition thereafter.
Oh, that's really good. So, yeah, maybe I think that maybe can lead into, I like some of those ideas, how can we better help coaches? We still talking at a fairly high level. We already got some good ideas like Tyler, like looking to beyond coaching into other areas. Stuart, maybe one idea we talked a little about is doing a better job of meeting coaches where they're at, in their place. Does that resonate with you? What do you think about when we were talking about that?
I think from my perspective, I guess it's that this was one of my, mild regrets, I suppose, a little bit is in my enthusiasm and kind of passion for what I believe the possibilities that an ecological view of the world, an ecological perspective, an ecological approach, and adopting an ecological approach, and the kind of transformative nature of it. In my commitment to that, I have a tendency, and I have a tendency to do this generally in life anyway, gets me into trouble, is just to come across as a little bit too certain and a little bit too definitive. And sometimes that's a misunderstanding because I'll articulate things in a way that are, so for example, going out, you could argue that going out with a podcast like the War on Drills, which is like kind of the starting point to the podcast, might be a little bit too certain. But I'll stand by that because it's a kind of it was designed deliberately as a kind of opportunity to try and create a conversation, to create a reappraisal, to create an interest, to start a discussion, and I hold on to the idea of that, by the way, because I think it's just a way of saying, there's this, but there's something else too. And you don't have to do that just because that's what you've always done. You can do something else. Now, the bit that I sometimes have lost sight of, and I guess I became a little bit too focused on this, was losing sight that, other people out there might not see it that way. and might have a lot of things in their world that could get in the way of that. And I have to be, and so one of the things I was thinking about a lot was, it was great to reconnect again with James Vaughan over Christmas, and he talks a lot about form of life, and he talks a lot about cultural dimensions related to coaching approaches and things like that. He talks particularly about, the difference, say, between, he currently works in Sweden, but he's worked in Spain, he's worked in New Zealand, he's worked in England, and the different cultural dimensions and the influences that drive a particular kind of way of being. I mean, you Rob, talked about how Canadians are very non-confrontational and apologetic. Us Brits will give you a run for your money, I can tell you. But, everybody has their cultural dimensions. But likewise, that happens on a micro level as well, because I can be working in one environment. So, for example, if I'm working in an environment where I'm employed in a school, and that school demands that I get results because that's really important to the school from the perspective of how it recruits future individuals, and so actually winning and delivering results is my kind of primary KPI against my role, that form of life might lead me to go for approaches that I believe will give me that kind of outcome over and above something else. And I would fight dearly, because my livelihood, my family, everybody else, that's on the line, right? So I'm going to fight vehemently against any Johnny come lately coming along saying, by the way, I think you might have it wrong over there. You might want to try it a different way. And oh, by the way, science, I know more than you. I can definitely understand how people would respond to that in a really negative way. And I guess the reflection is, have I kind of over-egged that a little bit? And perhaps. And the weird thing is that I know that actually the vast majority of people who kind of live and breathe the ecological space really don't think like that at all. And in actual fact are extremely sympathetic, extremely prepared to engage and prepared to deal with. I mean, you guys half the time must be thinking, oh, here he goes again. But you know what I mean? Because but you're very patient, you're very willing to engage people who are still on a learning journey. And that's definitely the way everybody in this community tends to operate. It's not like that at all. And if I'm guilty of anything, I think in my kind of quest to share this information is I may have come across as anybody who doesn't do it this way is wrong. And I'm right. And I definitely was not trying to do that. And so meeting people where they are for me is I guess it's my kind of resolution for the year, which is that genuine understanding of everyone's got a context, everyone's got a situation, everyone's got a different perspective and lived experiences. And actually understanding that's got to be my starting point before we begin any conversation about anything else. Where are the roots first? And then let's start talking about whatever else the tree looks like. Go back to my tree metaphor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think I've always thought of your war on drills as pulling people off the dock, right? You do have the IP approach is so ingrained. Yeah. Right? It's not like I have an episode coming in a couple of weeks where I'm talking about mental imagery from ecological, and the response you get is, how else could it possibly be done? It's not like there's a debate at all. So I've always thought of it that way. I know, but some people can see it differently. Stuart, that's a good point. Carl, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up Stu's point, really, really late there. I've forgotten the exact wording you use now, but you said something along the lines of like learning journey. And I actually, it's kind of a slight divergence, but something that probably listeners should be really aware of is that us in this group and others that sit within an ecological camp don't have all the answers ecologically. And I know you've said this before, Andrew, but we're all learning as we go as well. We're all knowing as we go as well. So whether that be in different interactions that we have with people along the way, whether that be a different book that we read, a paper that we read, a series of presentations that we view, I think that's the important part here is that there's not like this end point with an ecological approach that all of a sudden you have all the answers and you know all the things and it's like I can all of a sudden coach ecologically. That's to miss the point altogether. The point about an ecological approach is education and learning lasts as long as you kind of live your life, so to speak. You are forever learning things as you go. It's not just this, like end point that goes, well, actually, yeah, right, I've reached the level of Stuart Armstrong, or I've reached the level of Rob Gray or Andrew Wilson or Tyler Ewby or Craig Morris or Marianne Davies. That's not how it works, right? That's not how it should be viewed. And if it has ever been construed to be understood that way, that's like super wrong. I think in many ways these types of forums are ways for us to learn as we go as well and explain and interact and correspond with each other. To open up really interesting and unique lines of inquiry that maybe we wouldn't have seen before. But the point of it is because we're in an ecological camp, we are responsive to those things that we don't know. We can identify things that perhaps are of interest to us and that kind of mean something to us, and we start to follow them, right? We're responsive. We adopt those kind of softer or more fluid approaches to learning and education. So I just wanted to pick that up, is that it's not then a process of enlightenment, like it's not like I work with a coach that doesn't know an ecological approach and then I enlighten them. That's far from it. It's a process of my interaction with that person that mightn't be as experienced in an ecological approach. I learn equally as much of the way I communicate with them and the way I interact with them as they do from their commenting or interaction with me. So yeah, I think that's an important point to bring up, is that, and I get annoyed I get cranky with this low-hanging fruit that people outside of academia blast at us, is that like we think we know all the answers. I definitely don't at least think that. And the academics that I work with, a lot of people on this call and not on this call, are far from thinking that that's the case. And the papers that we write and the research that we do is actually in itself a way of showing that we didn't know, but we followed that inquiry that opened up, and we wanted to know a little bit more about it, and to write it in a way to help others respond or correspond or resonate with it. So, yeah, again, another kind of something
I
that
think
start off.
that's great points, Carl. And it's kind of a meta thing to me. It's like part of the ecological approach to me is not the idea that we're going to come up with some theory that explains every single thing. It's accepting the ecological challenge of every new problem that comes up. We're going to try to solve it by not appealing to internal representation. These problems are never going to end. Right? There's always going to be something new challenge for the ecological approach to try to explain and understand. And so part of it is just accepting this challenge as a problem solver, just like we're trying to make athletes as problem solvers. So it's kind of a meta thing. Andrew, I think you were.
Yeah, just thinking about what everyone's saying again about connects back to the idea that when you do take an ecological approach, it does just tend to dominate the way you do everything. I was just sort of thinking about the kind of academics that we are, and the kind of game that we're in as academics, for example, in terms of hunting for grants and getting that Nature paper and finding that one sexy effect. And I think, for example, a lot about the replication crisis in psychology, where people have gone out and found these sexy little effects where they've managed to nudge something into significance, built a whole career on it, and then the whole thing's tanked because it doesn't replicate. And then I think back to examples of, like Jeff Bingham spending 15 years working with colleagues trying to figure out how metric shape perception works, until finally, after publishing about 10 papers where he didn't get it to work, finally figured out the issue and can now turn the damn thing on and off, right? So, and it was just I had the benefit of being taught by Jeff, who takes that approach to these things, but it's not an accident that that's the way he does that, because that's kind of how we tackle things. That's how we think about it. And it's just, and it also just sort of just gets back to the idea of how everything that we engage with and how we think about all of these things and all the things that we sort of value about the process and all the things that we start paying attention to. It's just, just to draw that point out again, because I think it keeps coming up, and I think it's really important and interesting this is, and the other thing I was just thinking about, one of the reasons why the problems never run out, to get even more meta, why do the problems never run out? Because it's task specificity all the way down, right? There's no general solutions, right? It's behaviors in context, and those contexts can vary and all that sort of stuff. And that's just one of those things that we think about skill acquisition, but actually it's not just a little truism, it's actually a really deep insight into the nature of what it is that we're trying to do. And so we've got general principles that we operate under, and sort of the ecological approach as a theory provides constraints on our experimental activity, right? But it's not about finding that solution. It's not about finding the answer. It's about applying that constrained approach to a particular task. And then you have to do it again to the next task, and do it again to the next task, and do it again to the next task. And that's actually not just a little, that's actually quite a weirdly deep point that I think connects to everything that everyone was saying about the fact that, it's ongoing, and the fact that, so I'm having conversations like this, but I've had conversations with some of you individually and other people individually. I've had some contacts with coaches, and getting back to that idea of saying thanks at the end, like my creativity, my ability to do this and get better at it happens in those interactions, So anyway, just thinking about some things about that are popping out again.
Yeah. No, I think those are a great point. And there's another thing I wanted to raise from more from a researcher side. We can get back to coaching in a second, but related to this there's problems we haven't answered yet. I've gotten posts on Twitter and things where I post something about the ecological approach or ecological dynamics. And the comment is, well, it's great. We believe it's a good method sometimes, but you can't prove it's better all the time for everything. Well, first of all, that's a logical absurdity. How can I prove something's better for everything? So for me, it would really help for people that are kind of skeptical. And on the other side, give me a list of things you think, problems for us, right? What situations do you think an ecological approach is not going to be effective, right? is not going to, it's more effective to use a traditional prescriptive. Give me a list and we'll test them. And so, because I need that, we can't test every possible situation. And I've heard the other thing I've heard people say is, well, you just need a lot more factors in your learning studies, like varying age. And that comes from someone that has never done a motor learning study. They're incredibly resource intensive. I cannot have 22 different groups come all these different variables, right? You need to I need some things to test. What situations do you think ecological dynamics approach is not effective? That would help a lot if you really want to help advance the field. Don't just say you have to prove it works better everywhere. That's absurd. Yeah.
It's like I was saying earlier, it's like one of the ways for us to take this forward is to pay attention to those challenges. Some of those challenges are not going to be in good faith. That's fine. Some of those challenges are going to be the wrong question. And that's also a little complicated because sometimes it's like, I'm not going to explain how you form a representation of blah, 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 right? So you have to, there is always an element of somebody will present you with a problem, and actually the first thing I always have to do is ecologically reframe it, right? I have to verbal the nouns and I have to do it, and so there's an element of that. But yeah, no, like I 100% agree, because the thing is, and this was the thing I was mostly thinking about in terms of us carrying on is just rising to some of those challenges, because we should be, as opposed to just sort of resting on our laurels, right?
Yeah, and this is a point, maybe you can ask Marianne about this, is there's sometimes that I think a belief that ecological approach is just about perception action, right? That it's about coordination. It has nothing to say about motivation, confidence, autonomy, all that. You have to appeal to a more information. So Marianne, can you talk a little bit about that, what you to respond to that?
Oh, yeah. But I think really important. I mean, my MRS, what I looked at was motivation and skill act, and the key bit for that for me was really from having just spent a lot of time as a practitioner. I was just like thinking, do you know what? The quality of somebody's engagement is what matters. That is like so fundamental. And a few things, it's just like you meet somebody that is just like wows you. You don't spend the next 6 months going, shit, sorry, I've forgotten your name again. Do you know what I mean? You just remember. You spend years paddling and you're brilliant, and you have one really nasty, I got mashed up in a gorge in Briançon that scared the bejesus out of me. And that's it. It's just like one event. It happens once and it just like overwrites everything. And so I kind of I was like, meaning matters so much. How can we not pay attention to it? And that's kind of what drew me into that. It was just like, from an ecological perspective, we engage meaningfully within our environment. So it's not just where we're looking, it's how we are engaging that is really fundamental. And I don't understand all the stuff that's like Kelsall and people who do all the neurology and who kind of work that out. But I understand and I recognize that it's so important, which is why it matters to me with the horses. And I love, dipping into things like Franz Bosch and other people like that. And the stuff that Kathy Sierra does is amazing. It isn't just, X number of, doing that coordination pattern or through the, route through a neural system. It doesn't work like that. An ecological approach is so much about our meaningfulness and engagement and motivation.
I agree.
It's pointless not to pay attention to that, and that's what matters the most. It matters to my horses, it matters to my dog, it matters to the people I coach, it matters to me in how I engage.
Yeah, that's what, because the where I saw that, I had someone say to me that sometimes you need to use isolated drills to promote motivation and confidence, and I said maybe, but you can do the same thing, for example, with scaling equipment properly. There's tons of research showing that promotes those same things, so that you don't have to like. That's what I think I object to, that you have to do it an isolated drill. Show me where you have to do it, and I want to go test it. Tyler, I
was just to say, I think that's the nervousness of getting off the dock.
Yeah.
Like I'm not ready to get off yet, so I'm going to give you the reason why, versus like, let me at least work my way through it, and I'll kind of figure it out as I go, and might work in some situations, might not work in others. And learning, essentially.
Or it's I can't yet conceive of the alternative. Hence the desire and the request for the examples. Show me what the alternative might look like to that, because that I know, that I've seen, that I've been taught, that wherever I've got that from. I don't know what the alternative looks like, and I'm not yet convinced that that's the case. So I'm not ready. I'm not saying that you're wrong, Tyler. I'm just saying that both those things are probably true.
No doubt. What's funny you say that, and I think this is what you're getting at here with it. One of the things that I have heard the most since we started Emergence from coaches that are trying to utilize these ideas is, like they're coming onto them, but they're like, I don't know what that looks like in my sport. Like I need to see something, I need to see an example. Like I get what you mean. I just don't know what that looks like. And so that's kind of why we're trying to kind of put forth more examples, or at least, if we're doing it virtually like this, whether it's sharing screen and showing how that could exist within sport. And then, absolutely, at least walking them through it and having a conversation, which I know, Rob, you've done before on the podcast here when you guys analyzed activities, right?
Yeah, we've done it with baseball stuff, and I should do another one of those sometime.
Yeah, I think
one of the things I mentioned this on Twitter, but a good example, I think, if you haven't read it yet, is Stuart interviewed them, the CLA golf book. I think is fantastic. Even if you know nothing about golf, it really has great examples of how to use it. I also love that they all have a slightly different view of what constraints-led approach is, and they express it in different ways. Will Roberts was supposed to be here. He's leading one of the editors. There are going to be more of those coming for a bunch of different sports. So the examples are coming for people that want to.
Can I just, it's funny, whenever people talk about, you don't know how to go, or you don't know how to move until you've got somewhere to go. It's funny, to be really ecological, this really dominates. Dynamical systemsly speaking, that's completely true, right? If you've got a system and you want to transition it, it has to have somewhere to go. And my favorite example of this is the transition from walking to running as speed increases, right? So if you stick people on a treadmill, they start out walking and it gets to a speed when the walking dynamics simply fall apart because they can't keep up. And skilled runner or anybody who knows how to run then just transitions into a different gait in order to cope, right? And my absolute favorite example of this is what happens when you are like a 2-year-old child who's only just learned how to walk and have not learned how to run yet, and you stick them on an inclined slope so that their speed picks up past the ability of their walking to cope. The walking disintegrates and is replaced with nothing. Why? Because there's nowhere to go. And it's just, and so I always think about this. The point is that if you want to, you're talking about getting people to switch, to transition from doing one state or to being one state to being another state, right? It is literally impossible to do that if you don't have somewhere to go, right? And, to sort of draw the analogy, right, as Stuart was sort of laying out, if you don't even know what it would look like in your practice to change to do these sorts of things, then of course you're not going to move from, everything about you is going to not want you to go away from the literal stability of where you are towards the instability of nothing, of genuine chaos, right? You're just not going to do that. That's not how we work, right? Chaos is a disaster, right? Falling over is a disaster. I speak as a man who shattered this wrist when I slipped on some ice, right? Falling over is not a good thing. Chaos is bad, right? And so, But that's it. That's again, it gets back to what I was thinking about. What do we do in the future in order to convert people? We just crack on and do all the good stuff and make it really clear what's on the other side, so that there is somewhere for them to go if they want to come.
Can I just pick up a point there as well on the examples that we talk about, people asking for more examples, and there's an important part to that too, is that these examples like that, those examples in that book, Rob, are phenomenal. That's a cracking book, and the examples, Tyler, that you guys and your company make public are really, really exceptional in itself. But these examples are never templates. They're never representations. They're never intended to be like, here's the rule book, this is how you do it. They're actually intended to invite you into a world by guiding your attention towards, how these things may be brought to life, and how they may not. You know, like Rob, your point on all three of the authors in that book, having a slightly different perspective on what the CLA means. We probably all have our different perspectives on where we sit on the approaches that they spoke about in that book and the examples that they gave in that book. But it doesn't mean that they're right and we're wrong, or we're right and they're wrong. It's just a different example or a different set of examples that invites us into their world, right? And they're methodological questions. Like, to go back to Stu's analogy at the start, they're methodological questions. They're like the branches and the leaves, but they're still growing from a tree that is ecological, right? They're semantic discussions and questions that we can ask and have later on in the piece. But as is the case, I would hate to think anyone that watches your examples, Rob or Tyler or anyone else on this call, that making these things public, think that that's the only way to do it, right? That, you know, here's a constraints template, and you just use this template, and then you're a constraints-led coach. That's to miss the point altogether. The point of the examples is to invite you into a world for which you can then navigate yourself. I use the word self-navigate, but it's not really self, because you're responding to something that someone else has laid down for you, which has been laid down for someone else, which has been laid down for someone else, and the iteration continues. So, yeah.
Can we just make our motto, muck about and find out? Yeah.
I think, Carl, that's the beauty, and someone mentioned it earlier, of when we almost come across examples outside of our own context. Because we're not then hamstrung to a view of how it has been done or could be done or will be done or should be done. There's no like hierarchical relationship to it in terms of, oh, that coach is smoking it, therefore what does that mean for me? I think, yeah, certainly a lot of, well, the best learning I've had to take back in and explore and go on a journey together with people has come from, yeah, rugby or some of Rob's examples or wherever it may be from emergence and loads of different places. I think just because it's got no prior prescription at all, which is just an open canvas to explore.
Some of the deepest conversations that I know I have had are with individuals that aren't from American football, to your point. I mean, it's just like getting a chance to like be open and just kind of, I don't know all the rules to all that sport. I don't understand kind of the nuances of, you know, how the problems may emerge within that particular sport. And then just to pick up on what you said, Carl, that's 100% correct. You know, that's when, like, there's actually hesitation, like how much to show, because we want to make it abundantly clear this is just what it could look like, and these are individual and frame dependent and, you know, very context sensitive situations. And so, you know, it's going to be different depending on who you're working with on that particular day, so on and so forth. So,
Marianne,
yeah, I was just going to sort of follow on from that I'm sort of looking outside of those particular areas, and I find myself, I really got a lot from looking at things like biology and biological, you know, sort of the biological system stuff. My ugly curve is from is population mapping. That the inspiration that came from. I just looked at it and went, that's kind of what I see. And the idea about things like, you know, keystone constraints, what the constraints that or impoverished learning environments, again, comes from ecological research. Just digging into, there's some great stuff within management development that's not movement. So Margaret Wheatley did a lot of, you know, years ago. I was using her stuff more than 20 years ago, which makes me feel really old. Donna and Sarah and the people like that. There's some amazing stuff, and when you go in and play in there, it allows you to look through a lens that's not like confused and muddied by what you're actually doing and what you're committed to in practice at the moment. Just, you know, so there's that fresh lens as well that you can do when you look in these other spaces. And there's masses happening in other areas. I think one of the things we can also do is pull some of that stuff in, you know, and start building and linking across. And lots of people doing stuff sort of feeling that they're quite isolated as well in this world, that get a huge amount of motivation just from recognizing that there's all these same things happening in all these different places, and, you know, like almost like spontaneous change of awareness across mankind. that if we link together, it's really exciting. There's so much. And Tim Ingall's book, thank you for that as well. I was reading it going, this is awesome for somebody whose sports are about journeying in the wilderness, you know, mountaineering, climbing, river trips, and horses, because he talks about, a lot of it is about those hunter-gatherer things and relationships with animals. So I've loved that.
Yeah, no, I think that those are really good points. And I'll go back, Carl, that's a fantastic point about the examples. I think we can't say that enough. I think it goes back to the same point we came at the start of, that the ecological approach is not getting rid of tool things, it's using them differently. So sometimes, I know sometimes I've been hesitant to give examples too, because we always give the same examples, small-sided games. And people point, well, they've been doing those for years. Yeah, that's right. It fits inside the bigger picture of it. So I think that's a really important point. This is a possibility. You could do it. Yeah, Tyler?
Just the one thing I was going to add to that I've been trying to champion myself, both discussing it and then also trying to show it, and then working it into papers that I'm either writing or looking to write, is that we always talk about task manipulation, and people ask about individual and environmental manipulation and bringing that more to light, because I feel like it's kind of lost by the wayside. And even some of the systematic reviews that are done have acknowledged that it's just almost abundantly about task manipulation, which is maybe the most powerful and the easiest to do, but it's not the only thing, because they're all coalescing together. So that's just something that I know that the community has been asking for specifically, is well, how do I go about manipulating, or co-manipulating the individual constraints, or what would it even look like from an environmental perspective? And I know we've had conversations in the, in the EEC group before, in the Explorers Club, like talking about like environmental manipulations can occur in so many different ways. So here, from the time of the day to the surface levels and the like. So.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think we want to coming to some good ideas, I think, of what ways that we can move forward. I think a couple ways that I would highlight, we're not going to move forward, not going to kind of is the terminology thing. I think, Tyler, you point out, the terminology is important. The other one that I've been trying to emphasize this by talking about some articles that I've tried to discuss is this. I don't believe there's an integration path to like that's. I want to make that clear. Integrating is, you can't have any kind of ecological approach. It loses its meaning if you integrate it with any kind of internal model kind of approach. Then it's not ecological anymore. So there's no path. That's different than what Stuart was talking about, I think. Then going back, sometimes having to jump in with an instruction. That's not using it's the roots, right? The roots of the tree aren't changing. Yeah. Is there anything else though, people that moving forward positively that anyone wanted to bring up or that we haven't talked about?
The one thing I wanted to just add in, Rob, was the call to the call for commitment, I suppose, that Andrew's kind of been pretty vocal about. Again, I really want to just unpick that. That's not saying you have to coach this way. It's not saying the way you're coaching is wrong. It's saying that if you want to really give it a go, and if you are in the business of, say, evaluating this as a means by which to approach coaching, and you want to give it a fair shot, give it a fair shot. Don't think you can do a bit here and a bit there and then be able to make an accurate kind of judgment about whether it's for you or not. Give it a go. Give it some time. Have a proper rummage about and an exploration of it. Don't just dip in and dip out, dip in and dip out. That's not really going to give it a go. Now, if your environment means that's the only choice you've got, because you can't quite let go enough, but you want to do a little bit of experimentation and dabbling, okay, cool, right? That's fine. No one's going to argue with you doing that. In fact, I'd rather you had a bit of dabbling than not jump at all. But if you can, and you can find a way to, I would encourage you to have a good exploration. Just carve out some time and some space and give yourself the moment and to genuinely explore within this space, And then if you decide after that, not for me, doesn't really work, I don't really get it all, cool, that's not a problem, that's fine. But you might discover some things as well that you think are interesting that you might want to keep hold of. That's cool too. The point being is that you have to have a good old explore to really fully appreciate something. And Tyler, who is making me sick and jealous on a weekly basis with his amazing images of fantastic, scenery, knows all too well about the fact that being in that environment, you're all in, right? there's no kind of pull the ripcord and say, oh, actually, I'll just be back in my living room tomorrow. You're in the environment, and once you're there, you actually appreciate it in a different way. Immersion has a real value. So if you like, it's kind of almost like a constraints-led way of encouraging people to immerse. You're saying, actually, no, don't hang around on the outside of this pool. Immerse yourself, because honestly, you'll have a great time. Don't be that timid soul thinking, oh, I wish I was having as much fun as them. No, get in there and have a paddle about. It'll be fun. And I suppose the misunderstanding I think people have is we're saying, right, if you don't fully commit, you're just saying, look, it's worth it, right? Just and so I think I just want to make that point because I think it's a really important one, that no one is browbeating you. But what we are saying is, if you're going to have a jump off the dock, jump all wholeheartedly, wail your hands in the air, do a great big bomb, whatever it is you want to do when you jump off the dock, because it's much more fun when you do it that way and you learn an awful lot more.
Can I just add something really quickly? The thing that I'm entirely on board with all of that, obviously, but the other thing that's occurred to me in terms of thinking about concrete things to take this forward, it's really clear to all of us that you need, people need space to immerse themselves and to, engage with a constraint-led approach kind of within a constrained environment, etc. I think one of the things that's occurring to me, and I don't know how to pull this off yet, I have ideas, but one of the things I think I would like us to start thinking about is that somebody's got to build that pool. So there's a very real constraint for a lot of people that they can't, for whatever reason, spend any time jumping into the pool because of they've got things to do and other people to please, and all those other constraints, or they just don't have the time or whatever. One of the things I think that if we are very seriously about taking this forward is that we need, as a community, to think about how to create spaces for people to do that thing. So Tyler's obviously engaged in that sort of process, and there are things going on, which is great, but I think we need to just make them, perhaps they should be a much bigger priority than maybe they are across the whole kind of domain, because without us, think about it, we have to, if we want to constrain people into thinking that the constraints-based approach is a good idea, then it's up to us to constrain the environment suitably to allow the selection of CLA to emerge from the interaction of that environment. If you want to get it all the way loopy back. So yeah, that's a problem with no sort of existing solution other than some examples that do sort of live, but trying to think about maybe it's time to take that a bit more seriously and focus a lot of effort on finding ways to build some pools for people to jump into.
Yeah, I really agree with that, Andrew. And I think one of the things I was thinking there as well is that, Stu, I love that when you talked about handrails, giving people handrails. And I think to begin with, I thought, those are handrails to help them go forwards. But kind of the more I've thought about it, I think actually for many people, the handrails are perhaps for them to get back to where they feel a bit safe as well. So they can go and explore knowing that they can retrace back to somewhere that feels safe. They can recover that if they need to. And I've started thinking more now about handrails as being a handrail back out of like the ugly zone, as it were, if it all starts to feel a little bit uncomfortable, so that you feel safe to explore because you can get back out of it.
It's like the penguins you have on an ice rink. The ones that keep you upright, like those. Really, it's not really skating though, but it's okay because it keeps you upright. And if any of you have seen me skate, even a penguin won't keep me upright. So I don't even know what I'm talking about there.
Yeah, I got to use the penguin for a while. I got my kids off them as fast as I could.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great example, Marianne. I think those are great points, dude. I think we all should admit that we I think I speak for everyone. We believe that if you fully immersed your coaching in the ecological approach, it would be better, right? It would lead to better results. We all passionately believe that, but you're right. If you don't, that's okay. The challenges I have, Marianne, and I think I like your example, the handrails and stuff is, and we've touched on a lot of words in today that I think reflect this. The ecological approach is not, it's not a thing that's going to work well if you're half in. Right. It takes time and challenge. With the words we use, I think we use fear, chaos, right? Those aren't you can't go slightly in. You can't dip your toe in the water, Stuart, and expect it to work. Learn how to swim. It takes time to develop them and give them a go, I think is a great metaphor. Yeah.
I like the words of exploration and ownership and joy and all of those, and creativeness. And we can take those, or maybe leave with those words that come from an ecological perspective versus maybe some of the other ones. I've even given suggestions to friends of mine as of late that are sport coaches, whether it be skill or S&C or different types that have maybe been more hesitant to try it within their craft, to try it outside of their craft. So whether it be hiking, whether it be doing something that is different from what they're doing, but yet allows for them to at least kind of work through some of the ideas. And the feedback has been pretty positive, because they're like, I've never really thought about it like this before, that it's more than just sport.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. So maybe the last thing I want to, we've been here for a while. The last thing I want to talk about is the specific thing that started all this social media. How can we engage? I think we've almost reached the agree to disagree stage in some of this, don't you think? Or how can we better I think that's what's frustrating a lot of people, that in specifically. I think a lot of us, what we're doing individually, people love, like the podcast, and for the most part. Any thoughts on that? What we can do there? I know it's a tough one. Is it a matter of just staying out of the arguments and just trying to present information? And Marianne, did you?
Yeah, I was one of the things I'm trying to do, because I've got this whole series of podcasts, as you know, because a lot of you have done them, that are sort of coming out. So are examples really of how people are using this in their own environment. Faith has been published, Tyler's is on the list soon. I think James might come out a bit earlier, and Alex's, just because of what's happening in lockdown. So those are examples and things. And I've asked quite a few people from an IP perspective if they would do the same. And maybe it's that, and I haven't had anyone say yes yet, and I'm just asking why they do, why that is the theoretical underpinnings that they've chosen, and what it means to them, and what it looks like in their practice. Is literally, that's all the podcast kind of are around. It's just like, what does that look like to those individuals? So that's quite difficult. And maybe they don't trust it, maybe because I'm on that other side, and maybe I have to get a different interviewer to do them. But I'm going to try and do that, so that people can listen to those two things. So what does it feel like from a different perspective? And I'm also trying to, there's a few people who have agreed to do some joint stuff that are just looking at the different pedagogies and lines of, where they match, where they don't, why they don't really match, but why on a practical perspective it doesn't, you don't have to go all in. You have to, there is this immersion and play and explore, but you don't have to commit instantly.
Yeah. So I know this is a dead end that Stuart keeps running into, right? Trying to engage, invite someone on your podcast, engage in some formal debate. I would love it if someone would, there's more than enough things to write about. Write a critical review of ecological dynamics and publish it. Mm-hmm. I would love that. Like, do it. Quit just throwing little random things in the wind. There's lots to pick at it. I promise you. I don't want to write it. I don't think I'm the right one to write it, but I think that would really help. Like, if you really do have issues, then write something.
Agreed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, Rob. Like, that's probably why I don't engage often in these kind of Twitter debates or social media exchanges, because no one does anyone a service by trying to argue something that we write, in 6,000 words in 140 characters. It just doesn't work. So if you're really vocal and really passionate about countering something that we present, or that we, a stance that we take, or, if you're really against the tree in which our branches grow, go and write about it. Like, I'd love that. Yeah, and you know, maybe there's a home somewhere for those of us that might be, you know, associate editors or editors on journals, to propose special issues of explicitly in this coaching debate, this narrative, to provide balanced perspectives on these things. But I am absolutely with you, Rob. I think if you're really against it, write it. Put your money where your mouth is, and write it. This is going to sound like I'm attacking the stuff that a lot of people on this call have done, which I'm not. But write it beyond a thread on Twitter. You know, like, threads are important, and they have a time and place, but they are not a forum of which you can engage in a debate that this needs to have on a philosophical level. It's just not going to work, and you're going to get people that are you know, pissed off with each other and get annoyed, and it gets personal, and then no one likes seeing it. It becomes an ugly train wreck. So yeah, I'm with you. I'd love to see it.
I would like to wave the flag. So I agree with all of that. Do you know what? I would love to see a special issue of Ecological Psychology in which there were 4 unanswered, so don't make it like an answer thing right away, but like just invite 4 solid critiques, right, or whatever, just to, and it's not about setting up an argument, it's just about, you know, what's your problem with it? Lay out the challenges that you see, and then use those papers as challenge. I think that would be fun. The other thing I was just thinking, though, I do want to plant my flag a little bit for occasionally inserting ourselves into the arguments on Twitter. And one reason is that, again, it's about visibility. It's about reminding people that actually when someone says that, well, it's obviously the case that X, that actually that's not the case. And I feel that's quite important. And again, and one of the things I've had to learn over the years as a Twitter user is, right, I personally don't, if somebody attacks my ideas, I don't particularly take it personally, but it turns out that most normal human beings get really mad when you take on their ideas, and they get really personal about it. So one of the things that I've sort of recognized that I've had to really kind of rein in a little bit is just, you know, pick those fights a little bit more, but also remember that actually when you're engaging with some of these debates, it's worth doing in a nice sort of calm way, because actually you're not necessarily trying to convince the person you're tweeting to. What you're doing is just representing, so that anyone watching on the sidelines just knows that there's something else out there. And I've had a lot of conversations over the years with students and people who have just commented that they appreciated that the thread was balanced out a bit. So yeah, like, it's hard to do properly. Twitter's a nuisance for these things, but I do think it's possible to insert ourselves into, and it's about picking those when you can make a useful point. You know, sometimes the tweet's not phrased in the right way, and you have to get into a whole thing before you can get to your point. If you can get to your central point even fairly quickly and efficiently, again, you know, you don't have to win the argument, you don't have to win the thread, you don't have to stay there all day. But people are watching, people are reading, as evidenced by the fact that they get cranky when stuff happens, right? So people are paying attention. So at the very least, I think we should be in there, because otherwise people won't know we exist necessarily. So I just, yeah, it's hard. I get that, and I'm all for just if somebody really wants to pick a fight or to do it properly, really just give us something to chew on. I'm all for that, but just wanted to kind of representing a bit, and just making sure that people remember that we're here. Because and then, weirdly, like, you know, one of the reasons anybody knows who I am is Twitter. Actually, Twitter and the blog, and you know, those things have done all kinds of things in terms of amplifying just the existence of me to people who might be interested in the existence of me. And I deeply appreciate that, because it's given me all kinds of opportunities to meet up with people like yourselves and to talk to all the people that I talk to. So yeah, that presence is good for all of us if we do it right. And I'm not saying I don't do it right all the time, but I think that there's good to be done there.
I concur entirely, Andrew, which is you have to be present. You have to stand up for your ideas. But I'm not going to get dragged into some of the rabbit holes that I've been dragged into in the past. So that's commitment number one. Commitment number two is, and inspired a little bit by Marianne's safe space perspective, which is to broaden the opportunity for discussion. I mean, I love this medium. I think it's a great place, but the problem is that beyond the chat, it's very difficult for us to engage with people meaningfully. So commitment number 2 is to create a space with the help of maybe some people here where we can actually be more immersed in the discussion with others who are interested to do so as well. So to utilize this where we can create a breakout space or whatever it is, and we can, and I did something similar with Tyler's crew once, where they had me on to talk about something, and then I spent an hour with people who were interested just talking about some of the things that I'd talked about, and it was a really interesting and valuable experience. And I think the more interactive thing, I think, is the one thing I genuinely would like to create. And then the final one, and it goes back to Rob's point, is I'm going to continue to extend invites to anybody who wants to come and have a meaningful, good faith conversation, regardless of their perspective. I'm still going to continue to have largely conversations with people who are exploring in the same way I am, because I think I'm still interested in what they have to say and what they have to share. But if people genuinely are prepared to have a good faith conversation, to genuinely say to me, I think you might have this wrong, or I want to challenge you on this, or I want to have a discussion about that, I really, really want to hear from them. And I'm still going to make those continued pleas for people to come and engage. And I would genuinely love for somebody to do so. I've been exploring a little bit in that, and I will continue to do that. And that's not because I need to be more balanced, because people believe I'm not balanced. It's actually because I'm genuinely interested in the alternative perspectives, and I think it would make for an interesting discussion.
Just to pick up those points really quickly. I concur absolutely. I think we need to be made present at times. And we need a presence in times. I actually, though, have experienced the other side of that. Andrew, your point about, people sitting on the side watching, going, yeah, that was great. I enjoyed it. I've actually had colleagues, really close colleagues, come on the flip side and say, I actually want to get off Twitter because it's too toxic. I feel if I put something out, it gets critiqued instantaneously, and I don't need that. I don't want that. It's not a platform that I want to engage with. And I just think it takes a balanced perspective. I think the presence of us in some of these debates is super important. But for listeners, if you're using Twitter as a medium of which to determine what side of the fence you want to sit on, I think you probably need some introspection and explore beyond the realms of 140 characters or 240 characters or whatever it is. That's where I sit on it. There's a lot of brilliant information out there, which might be shared via Twitter, but to look at these debates that occur in these forums, to think that they're not based on things beyond what you're reading is pretty naive, I think. So a pinch of salt, I think, is needed. A big pinch of salt, I think, is needed at times. So,
yeah, the one I mentioned, the red flag for me is beware anyone on Twitter anyway that's never cites or only self-cites in a debate. Yeah, I'm not talking about anyone specific, but
Rob, all of my papers are so interesting and useful.
Yeah, I know the whole field, so that's a red flag for me. They're not, they have another agenda than trying to educate you, like Carl said. They're not. So beware. Yeah. Tyler, I see.
I would add a couple of things. There are so many wonderful things there that were shared. I don't need to reiterate all of them by any means. And I would just say this. I mean, obviously, I'm a co-owner of Emergence, and I would love for all the contents and everything to be available for free. But it is a business, and it's I'm not supported by an organization or a institution, and so that's a way in which we can make and earn money. But with that being said, that's why we try to offer movement meetup calls. We have another one coming on the 27th. We've moved it to the evening just because we're trying to capture different audiences, but it really is designed to be just a complete open space. I mean, a handful of you have been on either as a guest or you've been on in general, and they are so wonderful. And I mean, we probably should share this way more. The feedback that we get back from those is overwhelming, just like how comfortable people feel. And afterwards they're like, I felt like I could ask my questions and people listened and they cared. And obviously I could say the same thing about every one of you on here and the platforms you guys have, from papers to podcasts and the like. But that's one way, is just like, come on to the movement meetup calls. They're an opening for anyone. And the other being, and I think everyone on here does this to a certain extent, but with our Emergence Twitter account, we also do it with our Instagram account. We pose questions oftentimes to hot button topics like, what does anticipation mean to you? And it's generally designed to be like just an open forum to allow people to share, not so much as though everyone gets a response from different people, but just more to see what thoughts are like. And we don't want that people to feel targeted for sharing something that's not smart. I have air quotes for those of you who can't see me. So with that being said, that's what I would hope for. I mean, this may come as a shock or surprise, but I actually don't like social media. I only have it because I have a company. Otherwise, I would engage in other areas because I find it more useful. Because to Carl's point and others, like I have 2 children and I already spend enough time doing other things, so I have to limit myself whenever I'm messaging and the like. So I just know that for me, I can speak so highly about each individual on here, about what they're putting forth with the community, and a number of other people off that, that are not on this call. But Emergence is designed to try to engage with people. We're trying to put out courses that are, youth courses to underpinning theories courses. And so, I encourage listeners to try to engage with it and, or at least come onto a call. So those are the things that I would have to offer from my perspective that, I would love to see.
I've been on a couple of those and I agree they're great. I think there's room for everything, like from the individual interviews and stuff Stu and I do to this is kind of in the middle. I kind of like these. I think the Zoom calls are great, but when you have 50 people on, sometimes but I think there's room for all the whole range.
One other thing I just would add, and Stuart was mentioning this, I think it could be done in different ways along with what's being done at the Sport Movement Skill Conference. So that's now a project of Emergence, but I only bring that up because it was kind of what you were to a certain extent alluding to. Like there's breakout rooms outside of the presentations. I think there could be, there's one a year. We have one a year. There's room for 150 a year. And I think that those platforms are so awesome because someone is able to share knowledge, and then they go to a separate room and they're there for questions and conversation and discussion, like genuine discussion. And there need to be, I'll say it again, there need to be 150 of those per year. And that way we can bring the rates down. We being anyone, bring the rates down and allow everyone to be engaged.
Marianne, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to say that if anyone is on this that doesn't engage with UK coaching, we don't do stuff that's sort of like explicitly ecological, but that are mixtures of all of those things. And the coach developer conversations are very much about, bringing ideas and having that really safe space to explore, engage, talk to people from different sports, completely different environments, and to unpick those different sort of viewpoints and ways of looking at the world, and very much those are very, very, very much about having really engaged, curious conversation, supportive conversations. So there's I agree with Tyler. We could definitely have so many, but if you dip into it, there's lots of stuff. And I think if people are interested and they're not finding stuff, they can, at least Twitter means that they can engage, they can connect with us and ask about what else is there for them to connect.
I echo that. Love it.
Yeah, no, I think I would say for all of us that produce this in all the different ways, we're super open to feedback. If you have any ideas for how you would like it. I was getting a little sensitive that there was so much for a while during the pandemic getting dumped online. So it was a bit, it looks like it's getting bright and sunny behind Carl. So that's our sign. That's our signal. It started dark, so it's time to wrap up. Does anyone want to have a last word or any comment, or we can just sign off here? So I hope people found this useful. I was nice to reflect on that after a while. I think, like I said, we had some concrete things about how to move this forward positively. But as I said, if anyone has any comments for any of the things we do, people you'd like to see, ways we could expand it into different field, any ideas we would all really appreciate. I can speak for everyone. So thanks everyone. We'll see you next time.